Kamala Talks AI in NYC. Welcome to the AI Daily Brief Headlines Edition, all the daily AI news you need in around 5 minutes. We kick off today with some comments from Vice President Kamala Harris around artificial intelligence in a pitch to New York City donors. Now, to be fair, this was a bigger deal to crypto folks than to AI folks, as Harris has been completely silent on crypto up to now, but has obviously been a little bit more involved with artificial intelligence. But in these comments, Bloomberg framed them as her vowing to help grow investment in AI if elected. She said, "I will bring together labor, small business founders, and innovators in major companies. We will partner together to invest in America's competitiveness, to invest in America's future. We will encourage innovative technologies like AI and digital assets while protecting our consumers and investors." Obviously, this is not a complete articulation of policy. Right now, though, what people have been looking for is indicators of how Harris is going to treat business given some contentious areas of policy like the proposed tax on unrealized capital gains. Numerous leaders in Silicon Valley have broke with Democratic tradition and come out and endorsed Trump, in part because of a perception that Kamala and another Democratic administration would be bad for things like AI. In the same comments, Kamala also mentioned investing in semiconductors. Based on the discourse on Twitter/X, the comments didn't do a ton to reassure folks, but there you have it. Now, speaking of AI and the elections, Axios reports that more than half of US states have passed or are considering some sort of legislation around AI in political campaigns. States ranging from New Hampshire to New York to Florida to Colorado to California have passed laws, while Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and others are considering them. There are two very different schools of thought on this. On the one hand are folks like Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia, who said that there have already been instances of generative AI being used to confuse and even suppress voters, and that, quote, "I don't think Gen AI developers or platforms are taking the misuse potential serious enough." And then on the other side are those who have been shocked by how little there has been. Every single article you see about this stuff references a January set of robocalls in New Hampshire using an AI-generated impersonation of Biden, because that's one of the only high-profile things we've seen. Now, the adversarial take on this is that all of these folks who want to sow chaos with AI are just waiting until the very last minute to do so. And this strikes me as entirely not impossible. However, I think that if you had asked me about a year ago whether we would have had this much more, or much less use of AI to try to interfere with elections, I would have said much more. But of course, that doesn't change the fact that these could be issues and one that the electorate wants to get out ahead of. Now, if anything, this is yet another reminder of how much the messy patchwork of state-by-state regulations can be a challenge when it comes to an emerging technology like artificial intelligence. Moving over into the Middle East, Mideast funds are doing nothing but increasing their investment into AI. According to data from PitchBook, the level of AI investing from government-backed Middle Eastern funds has increased 5x over the past year. One of those funds, for example, is MGX, which is a new AI fund out of the UAE, which is among those investors who are trying to get into OpenAI's latest round that we talked about last week. Now, on the one hand, it makes sense that these funds are getting in the AI game, surely because they're one of the only capital sources that is big enough to play at the level of AI. For example, the Saudi Public Investment Fund has $925 billion, UAE's Mubadala has $302 billion under management, and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority has $1 trillion. MGX also joined a partnership with BlackRock and Microsoft that you might remember is aiming to raise as much as $100 billion for data infrastructure for AI as well. Some of the other interesting details from this article: Saudi Arabia is apparently in talks to create a $40 billion partnership with Andreessen Horowitz. Anthropic, however, ruled out taking money from Saudi Arabia, citing national security. And while there is controversy around these types of deals, there's also geopolitics at stake. Jared Cohen of Goldman Sachs Capital Institute called these nations geopolitical swing states. And as CNBC put it, for the US, having sovereign wealth funds invest in American companies and not in global adversaries like China has been a geopolitical priority. So much so, in fact, that President Biden is hosting the president of the UAE, and part of the discussions will include their plans for artificial intelligence. At the center of this geopolitical swing state strategy has been G42. As Reuters puts it, under pressure from the Biden administration, G42 this year began ripping out Chinese hardware it was using and sold off Chinese investment so it could work more closely with American firms. That was followed up by a $1.5 billion investment from Microsoft, which was announced by the Secretary of Commerce. This will be the first time that a UAE president has visited the White House. Still, the Gulf states are definitely playing both sides of this equation. China has been courting the Gulf states, which is of course putting pressure on the US to bring those countries closer as well. There are super interesting geopolitics at play with AI. It's one of the parts of the story that I think is looked at, well, frankly, not quite enough. And so one, I'm glad that you're hanging out with me here to discover. For now, though, that is going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief Headlines Edition. Next up, the main episode.